Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an author and historian making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is an instructor at Columbia Southern University. He received his BA in history from Ottawa University and has received 2 master's degrees, one in ancient warfare from American Military University and the other in U.S. military history from Norwich University. My guest received his Ph.D. in military history from Liberty University, where his research focused on Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is the author of the book Death Before Dismount, U.S. Army Tanks in Iraq, as well as the upcoming book Ghost of Echo Company, which focuses on basic training in the Army during the BDU era. He has written several articles and given presentations that focus on mounted warfare and their importance during combat operations. He is a veteran of the Army, serving with the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions, as well as the 1st Cavalry Divisions, as well as an M1, A1, A2 tanker. He completed 2 combat tours to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and he is joining us today, making his official debut here on the show. So without further ado, viewers and listeners, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, historian and author, Dr. Andrew Eric Wright Sr. Dr. Wright, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I truly appreciate this.
Awesome. So before we begin and learn more about your book, as a little bit of your background, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Possibly something many people may not know about you.
I am a Cornhusker, born in Omaha, Nebraska. Go Big Red. Currently reside in the great state of Kansas. Other than that, not really. Nothing that I think that will drop the jaws of the viewers. Nothing special like that. But just very happy to be here. Always happy to attempt to share the story and attempt to educate the viewers.
Awesome. And this is honestly about a period in history that I know very little about. As a fellow historian, even though my background is in classical antiquities, I always like to try to broaden my horizons, especially for military history. So as a little teaser, what can readers expect of your book, Death Before Dismount?
I think they can expect to be educated about the role that armor units play and the success that armor units had during Operation Iraqi Freedom. I think those are the biggest things, the biggest takeaways I would like people to get from the book.
All right. And I think mountain armored warfare is, again, an area of expertise that I know nothing about, but I'm always fascinated and always eager to learn. But before we dive into the overall history that the book discusses, as well as the construction of the book, let's talk a little bit more about you, Dr. Wright. So from your bio, history has been ingrained in your life for a very long time. Can you share with us what put you on that path?
When I was a child, my father, I was coming into the house and he was watching a movie. The movie was called Gettysburg. Probably one of the longest military history movie you'll ever see.
Yes.
But I sat down with my father and watched it, and I think it was then I knew how much love I had for military history and military conflict. And I've been a fan of history ever since.
Nice. And also, as mentioned in your bio, you received your BA in history from Ottawa University, as well as 2 master's degrees in history from 2 different universities. What would you consider to be your definitive aha moment that really solidified you into pursuing a passion to not only learn history in the academic sense, but also teach it?
I think so. When I started to get my bachelor's later on in life, So I was what Ottawa called a non-traditional student. Any student who's over 21 who goes back to school is what we consider a
Mm,
non-traditional student. So I didn't go back to school until I was 27 to start off my academic career. But it was there I met a professor. His name is Dr. Stephen Cope, who's currently the head of history at Ottawa University. And it was just watching his passion for teaching history um, that really hooked me and pulled me into the profession. Because when I first got to Ottawa, I had zero clue what I
mm.
wanted to do with my life. But after getting my bachelor's, I told myself this is exactly what I want to do with my life is teach history because I want to give the students the same experience that Dr. Folk has given me. That's really what put me in the field of getting my master's and then going and getting my PhD.
That is amazing. That is awesome. And also in your biography, you're also an Army veteran, as well as serving with the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions, as well as the 1st Cavalry Divisions. Can you share with the viewers and listeners your experiences working in the armed forces and then taking all that information and bringing it to the forefront in this book for you?
So I joined the Army right out of high school. I was 18 years old. Actually, I graduated on a Friday and joined the military that Monday. I went to
Mhm.
basic that Monday, so I didn't have much time at all. But I always knew my father and my grandfather were both soldiers, so I knew that I wanted to continue that line. I had a very positive experience in the United States Army. Not every day was good. I'm not going to sit up here and fabricate a story of saying that the
Right.
military is great 24/7 because it's not. But I had a very positive experience. I'm thankful to God that He allowed me to not only join the military but come back from multiple combat tours.
Right, absolutely. And as a child of, I mean, from the armed forces, Marines, Semper Fi, I'm always very fascinated to learn about children and family members who have served in the armed forces or have known people who have served, and just hearing their experiences and so forth. And I'm very curious, at what point on your journey did you decide to write a book about the U.S. tanks during Iraqi freedom? I'm very curious about how that came about.
So I always knew. Well, not let me back up. I knew once I was in graduate school, once I became a PhD candidate, I knew that I wanted to turn my dissertation into a book for several reasons. Uh, but it is our field in history is very hard to get into. It is
Mm,
incredibly, and especially nowadays with the issue that you will see higher education having with funding and all those things. It is very you will see across the nation in humanities and social sciences departments being cut
yes,
and unfortunately good instructors losing their jobs. So you have to do something to get your foot in the door if you're going to be a historian. And I will tell any student who's getting their PhD, if you can turn your dissertation into a book, I would absolutely say do it, because that is because most places when they hire, that's one of the first things they're going to look at. Has this person written and published a book? Has this person written and published articles? Has this person given presentations about in his field or her field? And so I knew that was what I wanted to do, probably early and probably as soon as I got started, because I felt that what I was doing was very well studied and it was going to be a worthwhile endeavor to make sure that that book got published.
very true. Very, very true. And in fact, Dr. Wright, I've had a lot of previous guests on the show who have also been in a very similar, I don't want to say situation, but almost a similar mindset, that they had their dissertations and they wanted to evolve these and transform them into books for publication. And the process is very, very different for everybody, but I think there are some overlap. So let's dive right into the construction of this book. So I imagine, well, I should imagine. So for your dissertation, you knew exactly what was the beginning, what was the middle, the details, and what was the end. But when expanding upon this and turning it into a book, did you have to make an entirely new outline for this book based off of your dissertation?
So this dissertation went through a very large scale, um, a very large scale. There we go. Sorry, lost. A very large scale reconstruction because as you know, it is completely different writing an academic paper or book or dissertation versus giving that book to the public. And so
Yes.
I had to first get guidelines from my publishing company, which is Casemate. I had to get guidelines from them saying you need to change this, and this. And then once I gave it to them with those changes, they personally made changes that aligned with their publishing company and their editor. So there's an awful lot that was changed structurally from when I wrote it to when I was able to get it published. But nothing took away from the story. Nothing took away from the message I was trying to deliver to the public. It was just more um, structural things and editing things that needed to be changed prior to getting it published.
Absolutely. And as we'll talk about probably later in the interview, the tone and the academic jargon, some probably had to be taken out because the average individual
Mhm.
may not pick up on those references as opposed to someone who's in the field who knows
Absolutely.
the history. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So from that point, getting the guidelines, what was sort of like a ritual or routine that kept you centered and grounded to make sure that you wrote the book and finished at least the first draft on time?
So Casemate is they've been an incredible partner with me publishing this book. I want to say that first and foremost, I was very blessed to have them. Uh, the dates they gave were very generous dates. Hey, Dr. Wright, we need this chapter done on this date, and they gave me more than enough time to do it. And I felt like if I couldn't do it, if there was something stopping me, they were more than open to give me an extension. But they had a date in their mind where they wanted the book when they wanted the book published, and so I had to continue to meet those dates because not only is it a story that I want to get out, but the reality is that you were contractually obligated to
Right.
do those things. You sign a contract with the public, come saying, "I'm going to give you this book at this date." So to be a professional, you need to make sure that you get those dates and timelines. But if you can't, like I said, it's always important to communicate with them that, hey, I need a little bit more time to do this. But you have to be you just have to realize this is it becomes a job. It becomes they're paying you and you signed a contract with these people, so you need to give it your best. So I think like having that mindset of knowing that this is a job really kind of helped push me to keep me on task and on target when it came to getting this book published.
Very true. Very true. And ultimately, as the author and the historian behind it, what were the goals you had for this project, as well as the promise making to not only readers who know the history, but also readers of the general public?
I think that the promise I wanted to let them know that the person that wrote this book is an expert in the field. And I think that people don't confuse expert with all knowing.
Mhm.
Those are two different things. But this is not just a field that I found one day and was like, man, I'm going to write a book about it. This is what I do for a living. I'm an Operation Iraqi Freedom historian. So the person that wrote this book, this is a topic that was well studied and attempted to be well articulated for the public. And so when you pick up this book, I think any reader can have my promise and Casemate promises that this book is factual and this is going to give you the best in-depth look in the armor community humanly possible.
Awesome. That is amazing. Absolutely amazing to hear. And now we're going to jump into some fan questions to sprinkle throughout the interview. And one of the first fan question actually comes from one of my viewers who asks, and this is actually something we mentioned early on in the interview, what was it like transitioning your writing style from an academic paper to a published novel?
I think it's a lot more liberating. I think you have a lot more freedom when you write a book for the public. As you know, academically, there's so many restraints about what you can
Mhm.
say and what you can write and how you can format. And an awful lot of those restraints are lifted once you start writing for a publication. So I would say that it was a very easy. I think going from a publication to the school through academics would be a lot harder than vice versa. Because I think for me, it was incredibly liberating and freeing to be able to uh, make that switch. It wasn't difficult at all. It's just you have to know what they want. It's just like picking up any book. You can tell what the public wants and what a book should look like versus what an academic paper should look like. But it was a very enjoyable process. It's a long process.
Mhm.
A book is a long. It's not a. I think people they lack the understanding of how long it takes once you give the publication company this your transcript or give them the and give them a rough draft, so to speak. It's a very long process before they say, okay, this is the date we're going to publish it, and now everything is done. But I thought it was a very enjoyable process for me, and like I said, I'm in the process of doing it all over again. So everything was good.
That's awesome. That is absolutely incredible. And this is another fan question from one of my viewers who asks, is there any other period in armored history that you would like to explore in a future book?
I don't think so. Only for this purpose.
Okay.
Um, we and I don't want to step on my schedule. We'll discuss this later on. I'm
Mm.
certain there are tons and tons of books about World War II. There's books about Desert Storm. So the main eras where you will see tanks at the forefront are those two, and during Desert Storm and Desert Shield during World War II. And some in World War One, but tanks in America, especially for the United States Army, became very prevalent during World War
Mm.
II. And I would never want to step on another historian's background or another historian's field by trying to intrude on in their field of expertise, because I feel like Operation Iraqi Freedom is my field of expertise, and I wouldn't want a World War II historian coming in trying to step on my period, because he or are an expert in that field, and they should write about what they're an expert in, just like I feel I should write what I'm an expert in my personal field.
That is fair. That is a fair assessment. Very true. And now, kind of going forward, so once you began writing this book, and some context to this question, as authors, and especially as historians, it is a very lonely venture in the beginning, at least. And I've talked to a lot of guests who have shared their experiences about this part of the journey. Sometimes they've told their friends and family from the get go, sometimes they told them towards the very end. For your experiences, Dr. Wright, did you tell your friends and family outright that you were embarking on this new venture? Or once you began to realize the ultimate fruition of this book, did you tell them then?
I think they knew. My family knew. As I became a PhD candidate, they knew that I was going to turn this into a book because being close with my family, especially my children. My daughter. I always tell. I've said this in the book. My daughter is the one who ran the household. Because there were many nights where I was in front of my laptop writing, and she had to be the one to make sure that the house was clean, the chores were done, those things. So, but I think it was apparent early on that I was different, not special, but different from those who I grew up with and friends that I grew up with. I knew, and this is not to cast aspersions on anyone who does any other job, but I knew I didn't want to work, you know, at a fast food restaurant. I knew I didn't want to work at a gas station. I knew I didn't want to do those things. I knew I wanted to be in this field. So I did let people know early on this is the field that I chose, and this was the route I was going to be, was to be a historian and author, and God willing, a professor of history. So
Absolutely. Very true. Very, very true. And ultimately, what has been the reaction like, the feedback been like about Death Before Dismount? Have they been positive, very critical, or 50-50?
I think the overall feedback has been good. I've only read one formal review. I will say this: a good review, whether it's a book review or an article review, has four aspects of it. You should talk about, give an overall synopsis of what the writing is about.
Mm-hmm.
You should personally say what you liked about it, what you disliked or disagreed with about it, and then you should state whether or not you would suggest this work for the audience or for an audience, and then you should talk about what audience you would suggest it for. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the review, and I believe the review that was for me was from the Journal of Military History.
Ooh,
I could be wrong
nice.
about that, but that's exactly what was done. The reviewer had things he liked and disliked about, or didn't agree with my writing, and he absolutely said he would recommend it to those who have an interest in military history, especially Operation Iraqi Freedom. And I think that last part is the part that anybody should be concerned with. You shouldn't concern yourself with a reviewer saying, I don't like this chapter or I don't like that chapter. Long as it's factual, you should be okay. It's okay for them not to like or not agree with what you wrote. That's okay. But you want them to say, even though I didn't agree with this, and this, I would recommend this book, and which was the important thing to me.
Absolutely. Very, very true. And this goes into another fan question regarding the construction of the book. And that is, of course, the dreaded imposter syndrome. Every author has encountered that along the way. And some authors I've actually spoke with have not fully experienced imposter syndrome or the writer's block, but they know that they've had some elements of it impact the writing one way or another. So for you, Dr. Wright, how do you handle A, the dreaded writer's block, and B, the dreaded imposter syndrome?
So I heard about the imposter syndrome first when I was a PhD candidate.
Mhm.
Um, I think that it is difficult when you write anything to sit down and say somebody's going to not say somebody's going to look at my work and think this is bad, or this is, whatever negative, fill in the blank. But um, if you are studying, if you are doing your research for it, you should never look at yourself and say I'm an imposter. You can always look at yourself and say my work could be better. I could do this or say this better in a different tone. But I've never felt that, I'm an imposter. I felt like there are those who are going to love my book, and there are those who are going to be like, might be a waste of time, or this is boring. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. As far as writer's block, I've been blessed because the articles I've written and the first book I wrote and this book I'm working on is incredibly exciting to me. The topic is exciting, and the story and what I'm trying to get out is exciting to me. So I've never felt like, man, it's just hard to get through. This is, cumbersome or anything like that. It's always been something I've been excited to get in and start writing. Now, I'm sure one day I may come across a book and I'm like, this is so hard to get through, but I've been blessed to this point. That hasn't been the issue.
Nice. That's excellent. That's amazing to hear. And before we get into some reflective questions, there were two last fan questions of this part of the interview that I did want to ask. One of my viewers asked, when writing your book, what was a favorite scene or moment that you enjoyed writing about?
So probably the basic training part, because early in the book, and that's what my next book is completely about, basic training. But earlier in this book, I focus on, I use my own personal memories and experiences to talk about basic training. And basic training is one of the most enjoyable parts of my 38 years of living, I can say. So it was very enjoyable to write about basic training and how that affected my life and how that um, transformed me from a civilian to a soldier.
Nice. And kind of following through that, the follow-up fan question is, what was the most challenging scene or moment to write in your book?
Probably the conclusion. And the reason I say that is because so when I was writing my dissertation, I was burnout is a real thing for dissertations because
Mhm.
um, most, especially if you're a historian, because we tend to have standards that are longer than other disciplines. So, like I knew going into it, mine had to be a minimum of 200 pages. So once you get to that 200th page or that 220 or 30, it's like you're burnt out and you're like, man, what else do I need to say? And then you have your dissertation chair tell you, okay, well, now I need another 10 or 15 pages for a conclusion. And you're like, I've said everything that I can say. So that's definitely I would say that was the most difficult because I felt like I'd given my all to that point, and now you want another 10 or 15 pages. It was very difficult for the conclusion. So
And it's actually funny that you bring up endings and making the endings, satisfying, because that's something that we will be touching on when we get to the business side of being an author. But before we get to that, there are a few reflective questions which I would love to hear your thoughts on. The first of which is, what does it mean to be an author and an historian in the digital age? Because both fields have changed dramatically within the last 20 years. On the author side, the industry has greatly changed because independent or small published authors are now on the rise. They are dominating the industry, which is very good to see. And for history, the history field has changed as well. You have more academics, more historians building a presence through social media, whether that's making content on YouTube or TikTok or using those platforms to help teach. It is very, very different from what it was 20 years ago. But with that being said, there are benefits and negatives to the digital age. And I think it is important to mention that because unfortunately, we do leave ourselves exposed to the hate speech, trolls, spam, and whatnot. And of course, imposter syndrome gets heightened with having an online presence, with people talking about, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How do you know this? And I've had historians talk about their limited experiences with like people questioning their backgrounds or their academics, or they've known colleagues that have gone through something very similar. So for you, Dr. Wright, what has disciplined you to not only be the best historian that you can be, but also be the best author you can be in a digital age, which is constantly looking at people with a very, very thin microscope?
very good question. I will say this. Let me start off by saying this. I think I agree with you because I have watched on TikTok,
Mm,
especially I've seen several channels where actual Ph.D. holding historians are trying to tell a story, and you have so many people in the comments. Oh, well, that's not true, and I looked this up on Google, and that irritates me to no end when people think that because you
yes.
can Google something that makes you an expert in that field. Um, so you do have to, again, that goes to making sure if you're going to be online and if you're going to do an online series that you have researched whatever it is you're going to talk about so that when somebody does come back and say something negative, you can say, no, that's not true because I use primary, secondary sources to research what I'm talking about. Another, and to I will say this: it is so easy today. When I like Dr. Folk, my professor when I was in school, he didn't have YouTube. He didn't have things like that when he was because he got his PhD in the early '90s. Now today, if I want to know, watch a lecture about ancient Greek warfare, I can put YouTube on, and thousands of lectures or
Yes.
videos will come up about that. So you're starting to see students ask the question, why should I go to school for this when I can watch a video? And it's a fair question, but we dive so deeply into history at the collegiate level
Mhm.
than you'll find on YouTube or on Google. But I do think it's important to have, even right now, I'm in the process of making a documentary, because it's important. You have to keep up with the world today. In the world today, when you go to a classroom, no longer do students want to see a man with a long white beard behind a podium talking for 2 hours. That's not the way, that's just not
No.
going to do it anymore. Um, an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old student they don't want that. They want you to be interactive. They want you to show modern videos. They want you to have that internet presence. So it's for growing up in this era, because I graduated high school in 2005. It's been a seamless transition for me. I think if you met an instructor who was 60, they might tell you it's been very difficult to make that transition. But me still being in my 30s, it's been something I enjoy. Um, but I also need to constantly remember, regardless of what platform I use, that I need to make sure that I do my research, to make sure I'm giving the students the best answers and continuing to show them that I'm an expert in my field.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, me getting my degree a little bit later in the 2020, later 2010s, 2020s, my background is in classical antiquities, as you mentioned before, Greek warfare, the Spartans, the Greco-Persian wars, Macedonian wars, all that stuff is on YouTube, and there are so many great videos, but how many of those videos actually cite either the other videos that they've researched or the books that they have? And
Absolutely.
I've had to comb through stuff to get the information when I was writing my own books, which is more in the realms of historical fiction, but still research based. And one of those was, of course, what if the Persians won the Greco-Persian War? Well, there are so many videos that detail that, but don't really have the academic basis behind it, like actually planning out what is the most logical evaluation of this scenario. I had a deep dive through everything and find my research, because even though I am telling a fictitious story, it is based in history, and I do want to show people that I do know what I am talking about. This is as you mentioned, you have your area of expertise that you are comfortable in, and I have my area of expertise that
Absolutely.
I am comfortable teaching in, that I want to showcase. And this goes into a very important discussion, which is another reflective question. So, context for this part. I've been doing this show, interviewing guests, for about 6-7 years on Spotify and now on YouTube. I've had the opportunity to meet so many individuals. Out of 420 videos, 189 authors interviewed, almost 50 historians interviewed, range from students getting their masters, fellow professors, authors, reenactors, and so forth. And it's been an incredible experience meeting all of them and learning about their stories. And the one thing that I've learned in recent years, that a majority of my guests that I featured on my show all began their journey professionally, whatever path it may be, during the lockdown years, the COVID years. And this has sparked a debate of whether or not, because of those COVID years, that it has created a golden age for authors and historians. And some people who I've asked this question, posed this question to, have given differing answers. Some say yes, because there are new voices in the industry and in the field. Others say no and express an Iron Age or a New Age is more adequate, in the sense that, yes, there are voices, but how many of those voices are actually persistent in either A, helping hone the field and make it better than it was before in the sense of the historical field, and B, pursuing the craft of being an author? How many actually are passionate about the written word, hence the Iron Age and the New Age? So I pose this question to you now, Dr. Wright. In your opinion, do you believe that we are in a golden age, or more so of an Iron Age / New Age?
I think that trying to think of a good way to say it. I think that it is always beneficial to history when any author can bring new, innovative work. I think that's
Yes.
always a positive thing. I want to make that abundantly clear. It is very difficult in history to write something brand new that no one has ever heard before. That is
Hmm.
incredibly difficult. Um, I'll give you a prime example. When I was getting my bachelor's, because my favorite historical figure is a man named Hannibal Barca. I'm sure you've heard.
Oh,
You've heard, yes.
yes.
Um, and I wrote, and one of my things that Dr. Folk was pounding in my head is that whatever you write, it has to be new. Well, it's hard to write brand new stuff about Hannibal Barca. There's dozens and dozens of books about him and about every aspect. And so it almost makes you feel like I can't write about something I'm passionate about because I can't bring something incredibly brand new to the scene. And if it's not brand new, you're going to have a difficult time. I will say the positive about my field is that there are not a lot of Iraq war historians out there.
Mm.
Um, you might see a lot of people write books about it, but as far as being a historian of the entire conflict, there's not a lot. So
Mm.
I am fortunate to the point where I can say that probably most things that I write, most books I will write, will probably, there's not going to be a lot out there on the subject. So what I would tell, and another thing, not to belabor the point, forgive me. Another thing to say is that you almost have to turn to writing now because, like I stated earlier, schools are shrinking their history departments so much now to keep up with the fact that the changes and the negative that is going on with the Department of Education right now. So you're seeing history departments that maybe at one time had 10 instructors, now they have two or three. And so now that historian is forced to say, I have to stay in my field. I have to write books. I have to write articles. So I think we're almost being put in that situation by force and not by choice. But I always think that it is great to have new voices and new information put out in the field. But I think it's important for any new author to realize that you have to make sure that this is brand new information and that you're not just regurgitating an older topic. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. And before we get to the business side, there is another important question which I did want to hear your thoughts on. That is, of course, the rise of AI in the publishing industry as well as in the historical field. Now, I've seen a lot of videos using AI content for history, either the thumbnails or the history behind it. And I've talked with many guests on it. And I think all of us can agree that AI is going to be in everything, whether that's in editing softwares or some way or another, and we can't escape it. And with that being said, what should not be allowed is using AI to create something, whether it's writing a book or writing a dissertation, because it takes away the human element. It takes away the creative identity because AI creates a false sense of individuality and creativity, and it mass produces it on a faster scale. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on this, Dr. Wright, as an author, as a historian, and what does that mean for you and for others in both fields?
I completely agree with you that AI should not be used to write papers or write books. And I think that's something in academia we are fighting daily on. But I will say there's levels to this.
Yes.
At the bachelor's level, at the undergraduate level, you're not asking a student to write an 80 or 90 page paper. You're just not. You might get into the 20s
Mm-hmm.
with that. So a student should be able to write a 20-page paper. Now, when you go to get your master's, yes, you're being asked to write an 80 or 90-page paper, a
Oh,
30 or
yes.
40-page paper. That's where I think you'll see more of the AI um, and the outright plagiarism be
Mm-hmm.
a bigger issue. I think that we've constantly, from our dean and from and at several places I've been at, been told ways to combat AI and combat that plagiarism. But the reality is there is no surefire 100% way to combat that. But I will say it should always be frowned upon. Yes, we should always use technology to further our field. Absolutely, not just history, but all field. We should use
Yes.
technology. But we as historians, we have to constantly be on the lookout for plagiarism because we're asking students to write papers, to write 5, 10 page papers. And so I think AI is a blessing because it does help with research,
Yes.
but it's also a curse because now as an instructor, you're constantly dealing with, did my student really write this or did he use chat GPT to write this paper? And so
Mhm.
it's a blessing and a headache all at the same time. So
That is very true. That is absolutely very true. And unfortunately, sometimes those AI created papers or books sometimes do get published in the industry. There's been one of those famous accounts of a book that was on Amazon. I think it was a bestseller. And they looked at the very end, the final page, and it said, this book was written using ChatGPT in the style of so and so. It's like, oh my gosh, you were doing so good, and you just left that page in there, and they took the book down. They absolutely took the book down, and it's very, very well deserved because here you have all of us authors and historians cramming hours and hours into making something that we are passionate about, and there are individuals who are just using a program software to just create something on the fly, a 50,000 word essay or novel in like a day or two and then
mhm,
selling it. And it's like that takes away from the art because one thing I've always been a big proponent for is that writing, whether that's anything, and especially writing about history, is not an indulgence, it is an obligation because history needs to be taught, it needs to be
agree.
shared, it needs to be written for all of its complexities, for all of its faults. History needs to be written and shared because if we don't do it, no one else will. And that is a very important thing, especially when you go into the business mindset. And speaking of which, that now segues perfectly into the business side of being an author as well as of being an historian. So this is another two-part question, Dr. Wright. So once you finished writing out and working with the editors of your publishing house, getting the cover ready, everything like that, what was the most surprising aspect of publishing your book? And ultimately, looking back on it, is there anything you would have done differently?
The surprising aspect definitely is like I stated, the length of time. This is, I think, because maybe growing up, I was a huge fan of Stephen King, and it seemed like he has 8 trillion books out there, and I think you don't realize growing up how hard that man had to work to get each individual book
Yes.
written and published. But probably that was the most surprising thing is how long it takes. It's a very arduous process, um, but again, it's a fun process, but it's a very long process. But the thing that I would do differently is I would probably I will freely admit I am, one of my weaknesses is grammar. Um,
Mm,
I will freely admit that. Um, no matter how many English classes I take, grammar is always going to be something that I have to work at. So one thing I would tell any author is if grammar is something you have to work at, get an editor prior to you getting these books because the more work a publishing company looks at your paper, your book, and says, man, that's going to be so much work to get right, that may turn them off from even giving you an opportunity to publish. So I would say to anybody, if you have an editor, there's somebody you can take your work to and say, would you look over this and tell me what I need to fix and all those things prior to, that would shorten the process because for me, a lot of what it was, hey, I need chapter 1 and 2. Okay, cool. I gave them chapter 1 and 2. Well, now I need to give it back to you and tell you need to fix all these things in there before. And that's what took the longest time for me. So I would definitely seek out an editor prior to my next book to have them look over things. I think that would help the process just a little bit.
Absolutely. Very, very true. And now going into, of course, a bigger thing about marketing one's book and the business side is understanding one's audience. Now, going back to what we mentioned before, you wrote this as a dissertation for a particular audience that is, of course, the academic community, the historical community. But transforming that and transitioning that into a book, I remember you also saying that you had to change some of the wording, some of the jargon, so that way it would make sense to people who weren't as familiar with the history. And that is, as I've learned with a lot of historians who are also authors, a little bit of a challenge because, we are taught academically to write in a certain way and to
Mhm.
write for a more generalized audience is an also different skill. So, with that in mind, Dr. Wright, how did you make sure that your audience was A, still the same, but also inviting to new readers? And at what point did you really get an idea of who your audience really was?
So, very good question. I would say I would make this comparison because I've been asked this before. Lord of the Rings. Let's take that. Let's take that series of books,
All right.
Lord of the Rings. If you are not into fantasy types of books, you probably aren't going to go see a new copy of the new Lord of the Rings and say, I need to go pick that up. That's no matter what the situation, that's probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, being a military historian, I have to be honest with myself and know that if you are someone who has no desire to read about war and conflict, you're probably not going to pick up my book. That's just not going to happen. You're probably not even going to walk when you go to Barnes and Noble, for example, you're probably not even going to walk over to the military history section if you don't like war and conflict. That's just the reality of it. So what I have to do is make it so the audience that I know who are going to pick up my book, that they can understand it, whether you're a veteran from the Vietnam era, from Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, or if you are a cook from the Army or cook from the Marine Corps and you wanted to just read about, tanks. I need to make it so it is palatable even if you're a cook, even if you are a dental hygienist in the military or whatever the situation may be. And I think I did a fair job of making it as plain as possible. You have to explain a lot for books. This is the tank, and this is what it looks like, and this is how it compares to a car. This is how it compares to things, make things comparable to things that happen in everyday life or that people see in everyday life. It is a challenge because I would love to tell you that only veterans are going to ever pick up my book or people who love military history. So I didn't have to change anything. And that's simply not true. Because as a historian, you should want those who have no idea what Operation Iraqi Freedom was to pick up your book. That's the point. That's the audience that you should be targeting. Because the veterans and those who love military history, they're going to come into the military history aisle. So it was a difficult thing, but uh, fortunately for me, the publication company that picked me up, they are chock full of people who have no idea what Operation Iraqi Freedom was. So they could look at it and say, "What are you talking about? Maybe you should change this so that I can understand it as well." So they really helped me get it to make it palatable for everybody.
Very true. Absolutely very true. And now here's a question which I am really eager to hear your thoughts on because I think this is an important question to ask. And this is more so of the business side of being an historian. And I think within the field of history, we are always presented with two paths for us when we graduate from college. We're either going to go be a professor or a teacher, or we're going to work in the federal government. Those are always the two cookie cutter paths for anyone with a history degree. But sometimes that's not the two choices for a lot of people. For some people, they want to carve their own path. And for context for this question, I remember I was in my final few months of my graduate program at San Francisco State, and I was invited to a seminar which was about using your history degree outside of academia. And one guest who they had on that panel, he was an historian, but he was also a best-selling author. And talking with him, I was able to see, there is something I can use my history degree for. At the time, I wasn't writing as much, but after talking with him, I realized there was a path for me, which was writing. And since then, I've written for a lot of smaller magazine publications, all about history and military history. I've written in 2 books of historical fiction, showcasing my classical antiquity side and my knowledge of the subject, and I felt fulfilled. And I definitely think there needs to be more lectures like these. So, in your opinion, Dr. Wright, do you feel that seminars like these should be a beneficial must to have for all universities with history departments to show their students that, hey, if you have a history degree, there's more options to use your degree beyond academia or working in the federal government?
Absolutely. Another great question. Absolutely. I think that that's exactly what needs to happen, because I think that a lot of students, whether you're getting your master's or your PhD, they assume, oh, well, I have my PhD, so I'm going to get a job. And they realize the job market is awful right now for historians, at least in the academic
Hmm.
field. It is awful for historians right now. And I remember I was just watching a YouTube documentary the other day. It was about adjuncts and the overuse of adjuncts in our country, which is a problem. But you see these schools, they'll have a class. Like my personal PhD class had 25 students in it. But I remember I was just reading about another big name school. I'm not going to say their name. They had a class of, what was it, 50 or 60 PhD students. You're not going to find jobs when you first get out of high school. So now you are $100,000 in debt, and you can't find a job to start paying off that debt with. Um, but I'm not discouraging anyone from getting into the history field. But I agree with you. I think there needs to be education about what is actually out there, instead of assuming that you're going to land a job just because you have a master's or a PhD.
Yes, very true. And I think there needs to be a lot more workshops like these to really help students show that there's more beyond these 2 paths. And ultimately, within those, there's what I call another 2 paths, which is, do you want to be an historian or do you want to be known as a historian? Because those are 2 very
Mhm.
different mindsets. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to the legacy build. Like, what does it mean to be an historian or to be known as the well-respected historian of, let's say, the American Revolution or of the Civil War, the most world renowned? Yes, that is a very good thing to have, but your goals ultimately, and this can also apply to being an author, they have to be realistic, because both industries are not get rich quick money schemes. It is not an industry to go into lightly. You have to know it is a grind. You have to showcase who you are very, very much over many years. And what also is very helpful in that scenario is, of course, networking. And I definitely feel another thing to have or to teach is networking in the field of history. And I would like to hear your thoughts on this, Dr. Wright, of how historians and authors can use networking to boost their platform and their awareness in the digital age.
I was told as a child, and I'm sure you were told too, it's not always what you know, but it's who you know.
Yes.
Um, so I think that anytime, and I've tried to do this anytime I have I just did a podcast about a month ago. Anytime I have an opportunity to do a podcast or do oral presentation, I do it. I do it because regardless of what, just like you said, regardless of what your field is, whether it's the American Revolution, the Civil War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, there is always something that can be learned. There's always a message that can be given to the masses. And you're not going to do that by staying in your little hometown. You have to get out there and tell people and meet new people and be a part of new opportunities to tell the story, whatever your particular story is, whether it's classic, ancient Rome and ancient Greece and classical history or whatever it may be, because that, and I agree with what you just said, not to back, I agree with you just that there is a difference in the type of historian you want to be, but no one is ever going to give Dr. Andrew Wright an opportunity to progress in my field if I don't write papers, if I don't do presentations, if I don't do podcasts, if I don't do oral presentations, if I don't present a paper to a large crowd. So yes, it might be a hassle. It might be a hassle, and it might take a lot of legwork, but you have to do that if you want to be relevant and rise in the historical field. It's a necessity to network. It's a necessity to meet people and to give presentations and to write books and articles. And if you don't want to do that, I would strongly suggest this might not be the field for you.
Very true. Very, very true, Dr. Wright. And we've now arrived at the final two questions of this incredible interview. And it culminates down to these two things. With everything you have learned thus far in both sides of the author world and the historian world, what is your word of wisdom to both looking to jump into the author world and the historical field? And secondly, what do you want readers, either general readers or academic readers, to take away from your books, as well as future works down the road?
As far as the advice, what I would tell people is if you're a first time author and your book doesn't sell great, don't get downtrodden, don't get down. Um, the good thing about living is as long as you're alive the next day, you have an opportunity to write another book, another article, do another podcast, do another oral presentation. So your first book may be a top 100 book in the nation, and that's great. But if it's not, continue to write, continue to find out what you can do a self-analysis and say, what can I do on my next book to make it so it sells better? What can I do to target and grasp another audience? I would also say if you are coming out of graduate school, have a plan. Have a plan. Like you said about the two, if you want to be a professor, have a plan if you don't find a job. If you don't land a job within your first few months or first year, okay, well, what am I going to do if that doesn't happen?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as far as my work moving forward, I would like people to look at my work and say that Dr. Wright is doing something in the field of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I would like people to look at my field and say he is telling the story that needs to be told about Operation Iraqi Freedom. And I feel like as long as people feel that way about me, then I will continue to be fine. I will continue to work hard and to push myself and to push articles and to push books, to push presentations out there as long as that is what, once I feel like I am not doing that, then I feel like it's time to pack it up. But I will always, that is always going to be my goal to continue to tell that story.
Awesome. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author and historian interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Wright for making his debut on the show. Dr. Wright, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Now, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? Where can people buy a copy of your book? And as a final fan question, are there any shout outs you want to give to certain people who have helped you on your journey?
Long question. So I will say probably the easiest way to find my book is through Amazon. It is sold at most bookstores. It's at Barnes and Noble, but I think that probably if you really want a copy, Amazon is the best way to find it. As far as social media, I am on LinkedIn. I am on columbiasouthern.edu. If you go to the history department, you can find me there. You can find my email. It's a public email. You can find me if you have any questions about my field. But those would be the places to those would be the places to find me. You will continue to see me. I'm going to be speaking at the National Military History
Ooh,
there in Arlington. I believe it's in March, but I will be there for that. They're in Arlington, Virginia. But you will always, like I said, my God willing, in either 2027 or 2028, when you will see the release of my next book, Ghosts of Echo Company. Um, as far as Charles, I want to thank my Lord and Savior for allowing me to continue to be alive and continue to do this. I want to thank my family, my children, Andrew Wright Jr. and Caitlin Wright, for their help with everything. I want to thank the Wright family, Ottawa University, Columbia Southern University, American Military University, and Norwich University. Those people have helped push me and get me in the position that I'm in.
awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. And if you would like to see Dr. Wright come back on the show, possibly talk more about Operation Iraqi Freedom, or possibly something else within his field of history, comment down below as well. And as always, viewers and listeners, thank you again for joining us for another amazing episode here on the show. A huge thank you again to Dr. Wright for making his debut. We wish him the very best with his book as well as future works. And as always, once again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all new information coming out later this week and the weeks after for the month of September. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.